Hello, and welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we'll be reviewing The Boy and the Heron. Mahito, a 12-year-old boy, struggles to settle in a new town after his mother's death. However, when a talking heron informs Mahito that his mother is still alive, he enters an abandoned tower in search of her, which takes him to another world. The Boy and the Heron is directed by Hayao Miyazaki. So Matt, what do you think of The Boy and the Heron?
So I think Miyazaki is hardly somebody who needs an introduction. He is one of the most renowned directors in animation that walks this earth.
Probably the most renowned.
Probably, yeah. And he is known for this classic and timeless style of animation that brims with vibrant and stunning imagery. His work includes the critically acclaimed Spirited Away, which won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature Film.
My personal favorite.
Your personal favorite, Ponyo, and as well as my personal favorite, Kiki's Delivery Service. Miyazaki often tells stories that weave worlds of fantasy with characters that are in a state of struggle, whether it be self-doubt, existential crises, or concerns over grief. As for The Boy and the Heron, I think Miyazaki added a wonderful film to his body of work, and also one that left me with a lot to still ponder. So forgive me in this review if I'm not as specific as I usually am. I think there's a lot here still left to think about. There's this very straightforward narrative about grief in this film with our character Mahito, as you were talking about, and he is dealing with the loss of his mother. And so that storyline permeates this film, but beyond it, there are so many other commentaries, such as commentary on war, the balance of morality and power, the delicate structure of life. And finding new family. So there's so much going on here that I admit I still have a lot of thinking to do, and I do think this is going to require another watch.
Yeah, this is going to be one of our worst reviews, probably.
That being said, I did like it.
I liked it too. Confusion is not the right word, but when I was watching it, I did have a distinct feeling that the film was smarter than me, and it had distinct metaphors that I couldn't tap into quite then. I think from the limited perspective I have right now, I can say that I think Miyazaki only continues his legacy here. A lot of his hallmarks, I think, are on display. He forgoes traditional narrative in favor of abstraction. The film is as abstract as Spirited Away, I would say, perhaps even more so. But I think, as always, he's more interested in enveloping you in this kind of majestical world rather than following a plot. The plot is certainly a thin layer where he really wants to play with magical worlds and layered meaning in his metaphors, right? It's a film I found really rather dense, and as you mentioned, I'm having trouble parsing what the metaphors are exactly, whereas something like Spirited Away was a little more clear to me on initial viewing than this film was.
So from there, maybe we should go into the plot a little bit, because Mohito, as you were describing in the intro, he moves from Tokyo to the countryside with his dad to meet his new mother-to-be. And there are a few characters that we have at this house. There's a bunch of old grandmas there. The most quirky thing is this heron that starts stalking him and is knocking on his window. Eventually he speaks, the heron, and lures him into this tower that brings him into almost like a world between worlds. There are dead people around. There are seemingly living people that got stuck there. There are these cutest little objects, which are little souls. They're like little puff skin things, and they float up into the sky to go to the real world. Those scenes contain some of the more beautiful imagery in the film.
Yeah, essentially, I think at its most basic form, it's a film that's about grief and loneliness, but the specifics of which it's about grief and loneliness, I don't feel qualified to talk about, as we mentioned. But the film echoes with this certain ache that it has. Like, you can feel a profound sense of melancholy when you're watching it, even while bright imagery and all of these layered meanings, layered metaphors are being shown to you in very creative ways from the animation.
And that being said, this film, I would say, contains some of the more disturbing imageries.
A little macabre.
Yeah, there's some scenes of self-harm. There is a few scenes of blood. And there's also this really weird depiction of the heron at times where he's gritting his teeth. And I thought it to be very off-putting.
Yeah. I want to give a shout out to the score, too. I think the score does a lot of heavy lifting here, whether it's to show you fearful emotions, whether it's to lift you up, whether it's to show the melancholy. I thought that the score was fantastic, probably like one of my favorites of the year.
Yeah, there are particular scenes where the heron is coming around, or there's another scene where Mahito is looking into this voidless pit inside of a cavern, and there are these dings of the piano that play.
Miyazaki certainly hasn't lost his sense of humor in this film, which is nice. I think the main source of comedy, although there are others, is this group of grandmothers, these old women who kind of like putz around the house, and they're very nosy. I always really enjoyed Miyazaki's sense of humor because it has this childlike wonder and this childlike strangeness at humanity that I really enjoyed, and he continues here.
And a little side note in terms of some of my most favorite elements in Miyazaki films, and one that plays very well in this film, is his use of wind, whether it's through the grassy fields that happen in the third act or the billowing hair of his new mom.
It really adds to the majestic quality that we associate with Miyazaki.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you were talking about the grandmas earlier. There's another character that plays a big comedy role in the movie, which is a person he comes across in the world between worlds. In this world between worlds, there's a lot of play on time. And so there are multiple elements like a fantasy that play. There's a building with weaving hallways that have doors, and these doors go to different time periods and different places. So a lot of the people we see in this world between worlds are characters we're actually familiar with in the film. And I don't want to say more than that to spoil the movie, but that gives you a sense of it.
Yeah, it's one of its more insightful metaphors, I think, and one that I had a bit of a grasp on, I think, watching.
One we could talk about is his great uncle, because his great uncle is somebody who is discussed earlier in the movie by his new mother, and she says he had disappeared. He had gone crazy reading books, which you found very funny in the movie theater.
That was funny. They can drive you crazy.
He ends up meeting his great uncle in this world between worlds because he had disappeared in there. I think this was some of the more illuminating subject matters, deep subject matters about power and your responsibility with power. There's some beautiful imagery with blocks that become pertinent to the end of the movie and their meeting, which I found very interesting. There are a lot of metaphors related to war. The film takes place during wartime, assuming that it's World War II. His dad works at a factory that's making the cockpit tops, so the glass tops to like the cockpit of an airplane. And in this fantasy world, there are elements of the war that are being depicted. There are a type of crazy birds. I'm forgetting the name of them, but they crazy birds. But there's a lot of metaphors lingering there that I still need to parse through, but relating to war. I'm not quite sure what this movie has to say about war, but I know it's got something to say, and I just need to parse through it a little bit more for that.
Yeah, I think there's something going on here specifically about war, of having this majestic, magical type childhood where you can explore many of these ideas and these worlds in your mind, and how the suffering of the real world can impose itself on that. I think there's something to do with that. Certainly, if we followed it, I think, down the rabbit hole, we'd find quite a bit more that would work for that metaphor.
I'm sure it's also connected to his mother's death, because she dies in a hospital that was, I guess, bombed during the war. I'm sure there's a lot of grieving that has to deal with the effect of war on his life and how he's tying that into this fantasy world.
So you ready to go to grades?
I give this film an A-. I really enjoyed it. I still think there's a lot for me to think about and ponder. In a different world, I would have given this a B+, if I'm going to be honest. But I think that there's so much going on that I really need to appreciate here. And seeing it on a second watch, I'm pretty certain it's just going to go up in value for me. So that's why I'm giving it an A-. But like I said, I really want to see it again because I think the film was just throwing so much at me in terms of its themes. Obviously, the biggest theme of this movie is dealing with the grief of losing a mother and finding new family. I think the ending in particular did a wonderful job tying all these bits and pieces together in Mahito's head and his psyche. And I really appreciate the movie for bringing that together, because I was kind of waiting for it. I was going through the movie and I was like, is it going to get there? How's it going to get there? And I do think it really got there. The pivotal scenes with his uncle in the blocks in the grassy fields of this world between worlds, another scene where Mahito leaves this fantasy world and comes back to reality, is very poignant and very beautiful and colorful and meaningful.
Well, I give this movie a B+, and the reason that I didn't give it an A- is because the child's name made me really want a mojito, and I couldn't get one at the theater. I actually do give it a B+. I think it's a lovely film. As I said before, I don't think Miyazaki has done anything negative to his legacy here. In fact, I think this is even in some ways a furthering and a deepening of his legacy, and something far more abstract, far more impressionistic, really him playing to his best influences here. It's odd to see him tread such well-worn territory and still accomplish something that's, fairly transcendent, I would say. But at the same time, it's as confounding as anything he's ever made, in my opinion. So I really do need to watch it again. I have a lot of faith in him as a director that there is bridging of the gaps as you watch this film more. So I look forward to doing that, and I imagine that my grade will increase as well. And that's it for a review of The Boy and the Heron, which is now in theater. So go check it out. Please let us know what you think of the film in the comments, and we will see you next time.